Namaskaram, you see, most people are addicted to movement, not progress, just movement. As long as something is happening, whether it's success, failure, drama, or dreams, they feel alive. But when awakening begins, a strange silence seeps in, and with it, the fire of motivation begins to flicker. Why? Because motivation, my friend, is born out of lack. It says, you are not enough. Run harder, climb faster, chase longer. But when you start to awaken, the chase feels like madness. You begin to see that you are running in circles, not towards something, just away from yourself. Motivation is like firewood. It burns brightly but dies quickly. You need to keep adding more goals, more praise, more enemies, more reasons to keep going. But awakening is the sun. It does not need fuel. It shines not because it wants to achieve something, but because it is its nature to shine. Now that can be unsettling, because for the first time you're not rushing. You're not hungry. You're just here, alive. And that stillness to the untrained looks like laziness. What happened to me? They ask. Why don't I care like I used to? Because you're not seduced by illusion anymore. This is the hidden cost of awakening. You lose the thrill of the chase. The ego dies a little each day. And there's no applause for it. No medals for sitting silently. No likes for letting go. But understand, this motivation fades because the story ends. And in the silence that follows, a deeper intelligence awakens. Not one that needs to achieve, but one that simply knows. And that knowing is freedom. Thank you. When we speak of awakening, people often imagine it as a beautiful sunrise, gentle and inspiring. But the reality is far more disruptive. Awakening is not about gaining something, it is about losing. Losing the stories you've clung to, the identities you built, the dreams you borrowed from society. Among the first casualties in this process is your so-called motivation. And suddenly, you don't feel like running anymore. Not because you've become lazy, but because you've seen through the game. The carrot no longer hypnotizes the donkey. The illusion that something out there will complete you shatters. This shattering is not a gentle letting go. It is a crumbling of the very foundation upon which your drive was built. In that moment, people often say, I've lost motivation. But you haven't lost anything. You've only realized that what you were chasing was never real. And that is terrifying to the ego, because without the illusion, it doesn't know what to do. It thrives on becoming. Awakening invites you to just be, and that is a foreign language to a mind trained in ambition. So yes, awakening shatters illusions. And when the illusion of motivation breaks, what remains may feel like emptiness. But it is not emptiness, it is spaciousness, it is freedom. The mind may not like it, but the soul finally breathes. Motivation, as most people know it, is built on a very fragile ground, the idea that you are incomplete and that something out there will fix you. It's a subtle form of suffering disguised as drive. It whispers, you are not enough yet. Keep pushing. And so you push, you strive, you suffer. But you also feel alive in that suffering, because at least you are going somewhere. But what happens when awakening begins is not a sweet addition to your life. It's a dismantling. The structures you built with so much effort begin to crack. You no longer believe every thought you think. You begin to question not just the path, but the walker himself. You see that most of your motivation was borrowed, planted into you by parents, school, society, culture. You were not chasing your truth, you were just following a script. This realization is not pleasant. It is not comfortable. It is violent in its stillness. Suddenly you are awake in a world where the reasons that once got you out of bed seem childish, even ridiculous. The hunger that used to fuel you begins to fade, and in that space confusion arises. What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong. Something is simply becoming right for the first time. You begin to see that much of your drive was based on fear, not love. Fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind, fear of dying without meaning. But when awakening comes, those fears start to dissolve. And without fear, the need to motivate yourself dies with it. You no longer run because you lack something, you move because it is your nature to flow. So yes, awakening shatters illusions. And motivation, as the world knows it, is one of the grandest illusions. It was never yours to begin with, it was a mask you wore to play a game. When the mask falls, there is no applause, only silence. And in that silence, if you are brave enough not to run, something far more powerful than motivation arises: stillness, presence, and a deep inner knowing that you are already whole. When you begin to awaken, truly awaken, not in philosophy, not in books, but in the raw fire of your own experience, you don't gain answers, you lose questions. You don't become more certain, you become less hypnotized. And in this unraveling, the illusions that kept you moving, kept you chasing, achieving, performing, begin to fall away. Among the most seductive of these illusions is motivation. Motivation is often celebrated. It is the heartbeat of modern ambition. Every quote, every video, every pep talk tells you to stay hungry, stay driven, never settle. But have you ever stopped to ask, driven toward what? Hungry for what? Most people don't know. They just move because stillness terrifies them. They chase because standing still would mean facing the truth that perhaps everything they've pursued was just a distraction. Awakening doesn't bring new goals, it brings the death of unnecessary ones. It doesn't fuel motivation, it exposes its roots. And when you dig into it, you find that what motivated you wasn't joy, wasn't peace, it was insecurity, comparison, fear of insignificance. You wanted to matter, to be seen, to be remembered. But the deeper you go into awareness, the less those needs make sense. You realize the very idea of becoming someone is a burden you never needed to carry. This is where people panic, because they confuse the loss of motivation with the loss of purpose. But it's not purpose that disappears, it's the false urgency. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself to a world that isn't even looking. You stop exhausting yourself in pursuit of what never satisfied you in the first place. So yes, awakening shatters illusions. It doesn't always feel like light and bliss. Sometimes it feels like losing your reason to wake up in the morning. But what's actually dying is the story, not your aliveness. In fact, for the first time, you may begin to live not from motivation but from clarity. Not from hunger but from completeness. Not to get somewhere but because being here is already enough. Awakening is not the addition of something new, it is the peeling away of everything false. And in that stripping down, one of the first things to dissolve is motivation. Not because you become lazy or indifferent, but because the engine that once drove you, restlessness, desire, fear, begins to lose its grip. Most people confuse motivation with meaning. They think if they're not striving, they must be lost. But striving is not the same as living. Much of what we call motivation is simply the discomfort of not knowing who we are, projected outward as ambition. We chase money, titles, validation, as if accumulation will fill the aching gap within. Awakening turns your gaze inward and says, look again. And when you truly look, you begin to see how deeply entangled your sense of worth is with your productivity. You see that you were not motivated by joy, but by a gnawing need to escape yourself. Your busyness was a distraction. Your goals were a shield. But as awakening unfolds, these layers are stripped bare, and what is left is unsettling to the ego because there's nothing left to chase. This is the part no one talks about, the silence after the applause, the stillness after the striving. When awakening unfolds within you, it brings a profound shift not just in what you see, but in how you feel, the very pulse of life. The familiar engines of motivation, those desires, ambitions, urgencies, begin to quiet. This is not a failure or a loss, but a fundamental realignment. You start to understand that what you thought was motivation was actually a mask, a way the mind kept itself busy, distracted from the vastness inside. Motivation depends on something missing. It demands a goal, a prize, a tomorrow. Without this sense of lack, motivation cannot survive. But awakening dissolves the sense of separation between you and the world. Suddenly, the future and the past lose their grip, and you are simply here, alive and complete in this moment. The old drivers of motivation feel trivial or even absurd in this new light. This loss of motivation can feel like a crisis at first because your entire life has been structured around movement and achievement. The ego protests loudly, confused and afraid. It clings to the need for external movement and achievement. The ego protests loudly, confused and afraid. It clings to the need for external validation and control, seeing stillness as defeat. But the truth is that this stillness is not emptiness, it is fullness. Awakening strips away the false identities and stories that fed your drive. It asks you to sit with yourself without distraction, without doing. This is uncomfortable because it challenges the very foundation of how you have understood your worth. But in this discomfort, a deeper strength arises, a strength that does not rely on outcomes or applause. So yes, awakening shatters the illusion of motivation because it removes the hunger that fueled it. And what remains is not apathy, but a quiet power, the power of being fully present, fully alive, without needing to prove anything or go anywhere. This is the hidden cost of awakening and also its greatest gift. In the end, the fading of motivation is not a sign of weakness or failure, it is a sign of awakening. It is the breaking down of illusions that once kept us running in endless circles chasing shadows of fulfillment. When motivation fades, it is not the loss of life's energy, but the shedding of what no longer serves your true nature. Awakening invites you into a deeper, quieter power, one that does not depend on goals, rewards, or external approval. It asks you to embrace stillness, to find completeness within, and to live not out of hunger, but out of presence. This journey may feel unsettling at times, but it is a path toward true freedom. Or do not fear the fading of motivation. Welcome it as the doorway through which your soul steps into a greater clarity, a greater peace, and a more authentic life. Because beyond the illusion of constant striving lies the vastness of simply being already whole, already enough. Thank you.